Each year, more than 10,000 people in the United States alone are killed by environmentally induced cancers. What is the connection between human cancer and environmental contamination? Let's take note with Dr. Robert Proctor, Penn State Distinguished Professor of the History of Science and author of Cancer Wars: How Politics Shapes What We Know and Don't Know About Cancer, and The Nazi War on Cancer, published by Princeton Press. Joining us by telephone from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, is Dr. Sandra Steingraber, biologist, ecologist, and author of Living Downstream, published by Vintage Press. Thank you both so much for being with us. I'll begin with you, Dr. Steingraber. You say that more than 10,000 people in the United States alone are killed by environmentally induced cancers. How much evidence do we have for the cancer-environment link?
Powerful, and I actually think the estimate that 10,000 people are killed by environmentally caused cancers is very conservative. That means that represents 2 to 3% of all cancer deaths, and it's the number that almost everyone in the scientific community agrees on. And when you actually do the math, it comes out to more than 10,000 funerals a year, which I think, we consider it a national scandal that more than 3,000 school children a year are killed by handguns, and so this is 3 times that number. So I'd hope to shine a spotlight on those invisible deaths. But I think the evidence is coming in all the time, from increased cancers among wildlife all the way to our growing understanding of how genes and the environment actually interact.
It's interesting, though, that the majority of malignancies, 85% of them, are classified as sporadic, meaning that no one knows what causes them. Do you dispute that?
Well, the word sporadic, I think, is an unfortunate term, and it refers to all the cancers that we know aren't caused by the inheritance of mutated genes. So it includes all the cancers caused by people who were born with perfectly good set of genes to which something bad happened along the way. So it's a kind of garbage can term, this word sporadic, and it implies more uncertainty than there actually is. We're honing in more and more on certain kinds of cancers that seem to have environmental links. For example, pediatric cancers right now one of our most rapidly rising cancers. These show no hereditary links, and of course 2-year-olds don't smoke, drink, or hold stressful jobs, so we can't blame lifestyle problems on the fact that we have more brain tumors and leukemia among toddlers now than ever before.
You've raised something interesting, and we often talk about, when we talk about what causes cancer, we sometimes see this in a graphic form as a cancer pie. Smoking, diet, lifestyle all take up a big part of that cancer pie, and the remainder goes to occupation and pollution. You sort of call that, Dr. Proctor, the percentages game.
That's right. Yeah, there's a kind of fallacy of saying that the percentages have to add up to 100%, when in fact many different things can cause a given cancer, and it might be something as unusual as the election of a president, which might lead to a cascade of policies that might end up allowing a certain industry to pollute more. So I think it's actually hard to separate out percentages. One thing you can do is you can say what kinds of cancers to what degree are preventable. And what we know is that the majority of cancers are preventable. And I guess that's the problem, is that not enough has been done to prevent those cancers.
You mentioned a president, and in your book you say Ronald Reagan's election in 1980 may have caused thousands of additional cancer deaths. You refer to it as the Reagan effect.
That's right. Yeah, what you saw is a complete gutting of the solar energy program, a reinforcement of nuclear energy and burning fossil fuels and so forth, and really the view pretty much that people are to blame for their own cancers, and people should act on an individual basis. And so as a result of the shift in politics that occurred at that time, you actually had a much, much larger number of cancers than you would have had otherwise.
Would this explain, Dr. Proctor, you point out in your book that President Nixon declared war on cancer more than 30 years ago, and of course cancer deaths are much higher, or cancer incidents rather, are much higher than they were even then. Why aren't we winning this war on cancer?
Well, I think it's because the prevention of cancer is not really taken seriously. The major research bodies that focus on cancer, groups like the National Cancer Institute, spend a very tiny fraction of their income on prevention. Prevention is ultimately a political process. It's a process of taking steps to clean up the environment and prevent smoking and doing whatever else you can to prevent exposure to carcinogens. And that really does take some type of political action.
I want to get your read on this, Dr. Steingraber, because the National Cancer Institute and the American Cancer Society, they do frame this problem as caused primarily by behavior and lifestyle, and I'm wondering to what extent you feel that takes us away from what is also one of the root causes, environmental pollution.
Well, I'm an ecologist, so for example, when I hear the word diet, I not only think of lifestyle and our decisions as to what kind of food we want to eat, which is in some degree a matter of individual choice, but I also think about diet as our place on the food chain. And there are plenty of things in our diet that we don't have control over. For example, dioxin, which is one of the most potent carcinogens we know of, falls from the sky. It's an air pollutant, and it coats grass, and cows eat the grass. And because it's a contaminant and a carcinogen that multiplies as it moves up the food chain, our highest exposures come from eating animal products such as fish, meat, dairy, and things high in the food chain. So, for example, some of the associations we see between high intake of animal products and cancer may have less to do with the inherent properties of the animal-based food itself and more to do with the fact that these foods are serving as vehicles to carry environmental carcinogens into our body. So diet has one foot in the lifestyle category and one foot in the ecology category, which is why I agree with Dr. Proctor that it is a percentages game. Any one cancer we know has 8 to 10 mutations that have to be present before a cancer is actually formed. Some of those may be lifestyle changes, some of them may be environmental, some of them may be inherited predispositions, but it's not going to all add up to one neat figure that we can divide up.
You mentioned heredity several times in this conversation already, and you say that shining the spotlight on inheritance focuses us on the one piece of the puzzle we can do absolutely nothing about.
Well, I think that there's a lot of irony in the focus right now on these so-called cancer genes, because a lot of people ask me if the work that I do looking at environmental causes of cancer, they say, isn't this depressing? But to me, what's more depressing than that is to imagine that somehow all this is carried in our genes and we've inherited these proclivities to have cancer, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about that. But the fact is that that's really a myth, and one of my colleagues, I think, came up with a brilliant metaphor that's very accurate, pointing out that really these inherited predispositions are like bullets in a loaded gun. Some of us may have 1 or 2 bullets in the chamber, some may have a whole chamber full of 6, but it's the environment that pulls the trigger. So we can do everything about cleaning up in the environment. We can't do anything about the genes we've inherited. So I think by focusing on these so-called cancer genes, we're actually putting a lot of time and energy on the one piece of the puzzle for which there's very little we can do, whereas looking at the environment is a far more hopeful and innovative, imaginative approach to prevention.
Politically, Dr. Proctor, why aren't we changing the focus?
Well, I guess that you have to look at research priorities and the kinds of things that governments and powerful groups like to have done. I live in a town where ChemLawn is a verb, and why is it that people are struggling to eliminate their weeds, or these are aesthetic issues. And
so this is a cultural problem as well.
Of course, it's a cultural problem. It's a problem of tobacco, which is by far the single most important cause of cancer and the most preventable cancer are the tobacco cancers. So you have to ask, why does our government encourage the production of tobacco, the export of tobacco? We're in the midst of the world's largest epidemic of cancer right now, with world cancer growing, and much of that has to do with tobacco use. Part of it has to do with other environmental contaminants. So these, for every product there's an important political force that's proportional really to the economic strength of that product. And if that product has been implicated in cancer, then usually the powerful forces surrounding that will try to defend it. And that's what's happened, is that basically for every carcinogen you have a trade association which is involved in protecting that and saying, well, it's really not so bad. and that keeps it on the market.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned Chemelon and pesticides, and you point out in your book, Dr. Steingraber, that since Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, pesticide use in the U.S. has more than doubled. There are now about 100,000 chemicals in commercial use, and most of them, I think only 600 or 700 have ever actually been tested. But the ones that concern you the most, it seems, are these new chemicals that are estrogenic. What does that mean, and why is that of particular concern to you?
Well, it turns out that there's a whole category of chemicals that don't break our genes directly. There's this old idea that in order to cause cancer, you actually have to cause a mutation, and that's true. But the new science is showing us is that there are a whole set of other chemicals that are like supporting actors in this drama that actually don't break genes, but have the ability to mimic the chemical signals, namely hormones, that turn genes off and on. So it's like pressing keys in a piano at the wrong time. You're not breaking the piano, but you're altering the cellular processes, and by that way enhancing the cancer-causing process. And so a lot of the chemicals that we're worried about have the ability to mimic estrogen, which has a direct relationship to some of the big-ticket malignancies like breast and ovarian cancers. So I think that it becomes a very important women's issue when we realize, for example, that the most popular herbicide used in the U.S., atrazine, which is actually banned for use in much of Europe because of its link to breast and ovarian cancer, mimics, for example, the ability of, it doesn't mimic estrogen, but it interferes with the hormone that goes from the pituitary gland that regulates the menstrual cycle. And by altering the menstrual cycle, you alter, which the breast is under the control of, you alter the processes in the breast and ovary itself. So this is receiving a lot of scientific attention now, and I think the evidence coming out of this new study is really mounting a challenge to the way we regulate different kinds of toxic chemicals in this country.
We have just a minute remaining. You are a cancer survivor, Dr. Steingraber. I'm wondering, do most people who survive cancer, do they wonder, where did I get this cancer, or are they more concerned about the cure and treatment?
Well, I think it depends on who you are. I was a biologist first and foremost, even though I was very young when I developed bladder cancer at age 20, which is a disease with exquisite and long-standing connections to the environment. So when I myself ask the question, why me, I ask it in a very biological way. So part of my project in living downstream was to actually go in search of what I call my ecological roots. And now that I've become a mother as well as a cancer survivor, I'm very interested in how some of the exposures happen in the womb and prenatally.
Okay. I'm going to have to stop you there because we're running out of time, but I'm pleased to know that you'll be back with us tomorrow. We've been talking with Sandra Steingraber and cancer historian Robert Proctor. We'll be back for Take Note. I'm Patty Satalia.
A copy of the program you've just seen can be purchased through Penn State Media Sales at mediasales.psu.edu or by calling 800-770-2111.